I feel like it's, part of our job, our duty, as people who wield some kind of influence to really use that in a responsible way and
Yes.
to be accountable. Because when you're given those types of platforms, when we're given these types of platforms and these types of businesses, and people are listening to us, that if we're doing anything other than uniting, then that can be a frightening and slippery slope to go down.
Well, hello, Amanda.
Hi, Drew.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fabulous. I appreciate you taking this time to have this chat. You and I have had some extraordinarily juicy conversations
Yeah.
about influencing these days. What does it mean? What does it look like? So, as I've shared with you, one of my biggest fascinations is conversations. What do they look like? How do they play in our life? How do we actually have them make the impact that we want? So I'd like to just start off for some. What does that mean? What does that mean having a conversation? What does that look like for you?
For me, having a conversation is listening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's always for me more about listening than speaking,
Mm.
so that I can get into another person's world and see how it is for them, how they're perceiving things, and through which, what their lens is all about due to, their experiences, their life, where they come from, how they see things, how they see the world, how they see situations. So it's really, for me, a conversation is very much about listening, very actively listening.
It's so interesting because most people think it's all about speaking. And I think that that's part of why we have the world that we do now is because people are addicted to the speaking and they forget to actually listen. Yeah.
I agree.
So tell me, you and I have had a lot of conversations about what does it mean to be an influencer and what does that really look like these days? And, I think when we've shared what I love about you is that you are an influencer that set out that wasn't your intention to be an influencer. You just happened to end up being an influencer. But I think it's really important for people these days to kind of sort out for themselves what does that actually look like and what does that mean?
Yeah, I that's interesting. I definitely did not set out to be an influencer. Yeah. What does it mean to be an influencer?
Because people throw that word around very loosey goosey these days and what it means. And I think people have like this perceived concept about it. And I think people are actually a bit reluctant to be an influencer because for some people it has somewhat of a negative connotation. But throughout history, people have been influencers. It just
Yes,
inside of our current social media world, it's kind of taken on a whole different world.
I agree. I think that to be an influencer is, I mean, I think we're all influencers. I mean, some people are more out there in the world using social media or a platform to have a louder voice.
Hmm.
But even inside of our own families and even inside of our own, small friend circles, we're all each influencers in our own way. And I think that if anyone's exploring wanting to become sort of what is considered a quote unquote influencer, that I think it's really critical to look at, well, why what
Hmm.
why do you want to be an influencer? So what's driving you? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it personal validation? Is it to have people, say how beautiful you are? Is it to for people to look at how big your house is, how much money you have, what kind of car you drive, how beautiful your body is, things of that nature. I find that a lot of people who are influencers for reasons that sometimes align with those things I mentioned,
Hmm.
and that's okay. There are many influencers who are influencers that are aligned with those with certain things of like for those things, for example. Um, and then I think that it's also, so when we look at, if we want to be an influencer in this world, first of all, looking at why we want to. So what are we trying to influence? So for me, because I can only speak for myself, I I took to the world of social media and film to influence the way that, to take a look at why we are constantly listening to polarizing and dividing messages and
Mhm.
messaging in
Yep.
social media. And it was something that personally bothered me, very powerfully, especially in the past. I would say it started bothering me probably in, when the Occupy Wall Street movement happened.
Hmm.
uh, I was very much involved in that in New York. And when that first came about, I wouldn't say I wasn't. I was an activist before that, but when that movement perhaps started, I think I became very much interested in looking at why things were going on and why things were happening and why things had to be a certain way, and if I personally had any power to change that, because at that time I felt quite powerless to make any real changes in areas that bothered me.
Hmm.
And um, I was fortunate enough to be mentored by a woman who is a former director of capacity and leadership development at the United Nations. Her name is Dr. Monica Sharma. And she began mentoring me in 2009. And when it's been one of the greatest gifts I ever had was being a mentee of hers, because what she taught me, which is something that I've never lost, is that I myself as a human being do have the power to make a difference. And knowing that and really embodying that and standing in that has given me the capacity to also empower others to recognize that they too have the power to make a difference, whether as an individual or an organization. And once I really, really took that on, it became my life's mission to make a difference in any area that was bothering me. I mean, it didn't matter. It was, if it was, if I saw an injustice happening, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something about that. If I
Hmm.
saw, or you're not that I've got to, or how can I do, what can I do to shift something in that area? How can I add whatever expertise I have or whatever wisdom or knowledge I've got into supporting something that is an issue that I saw that could be changed for the betterment of humanity? And also not so much asserting my own self into those spaces, which I did very much do as well, but
Hmm.
also to listening to why people felt the way they did about those situations, and then looking at how that also aligned with my own values and what it is that I stand for. Because sometimes, things can bother me, but they may not bother others, and vice versa.
Right. Yeah.
And I found that that's an interesting thing too. And I know Drew, you and I have spoken about that. Like, there's some things that can bother, other people that may not necessarily bother me, and vice versa. And so I'm always curious to find out, what impacts people in general, and what impacts certain people and not others, and looking at how all of that, complexity kind of works, and how with my mission being to unite humanity, what my role in that is to play to ensure that I stand in that constantly, whether or not something is bothering me personally. If my commitment is to unite humanity, these things better matter to me, because if they don't, then I won't be able to unite humanity, or have some co-creative process in that mission.
Hmm. I can see why you are and you became an influencer. And I hadn't seen this before in this way. It's because you listen. And I hadn't ever seen the power. Like, I agree with you when it comes to conversations. that the most powerful thing is the listening, it's not the speaking. I 100% agree. One of the things that you shared, though, I'm actually seeing is that in order to be powerful in influencing, it's more about the listening than it is the speaking. And I think, particularly if you want to be an influencer that has true impact, you're really committed to making a difference in the world. And I see why you have become an influencer is because you're listening. You're
Yeah.
listening to the cultural conversation versus the individual, but the cultural conversation about what needs to be said or what wants to be said or what wants to be discussed.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's taken a lot of learning on my own part, is
Mm.
to listen more than to, and to really, uh, put my ego aside,
Yeah.
uh, because so much of, I think, influencing, and wanting to be wanting to be an influencer
Yeah.
is wanting people to see you as, something that's perhaps special. And for me, there's also a little bit of a thing that comes along with influencing, in my personal opinion, and that is that a lot of influencers, what from what I've observed, is that they are influencing in areas that are considered socially acceptable.
Mm.
And so and that's quite common. And when you become an influencer that is influencing in areas that are considered socially acceptable, you are taken in really by the masses, because people follow what the current state of, what is socially acceptable, is all about. So
Yeah.
people follow that. Now, if you are an influencer or are a person who is speaking on topics they may not be considered socially acceptable, you may not become, as big of an influencer as other people who are doing what is considered more socially acceptable. But on the other hand, you could also become quite a big influencer, because you're then speaking to a group of people that might not necessarily have as loud of a voice.
Yes. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think it's so important these days because there is a consistent narrative across the media platforms. And unfortunately, like you say, those voices that need to be heard, or at least inside of the conversation, get drowned out. And I think that this is, those influencers that are courageous enough to not go against it for the sake of going against something. Because there are those people that are just, they go against it because it's a great strategy to get followers and everything. But those people that, like you, are listening for voices that aren't being heard or that should be part of the conversation and being courageous enough to bring them to the conversation, for me, that's kind of the future of humanity. That's kind of what's at stake here. I mean, I don't mean to be dramatic about it, but otherwise, what happens is we're just carried along the drift of whatever, certain people want the narrative to be. And so, and polarization works, right? It sells newspapers. We know that, but we've become a society that's completely divided now, and we're not united. But the only way that we are going to get united is for people like you that are courageous enough to stand up and say, "Hey, wait, no one's listening to one another, and what's missing that would make the difference?"
It takes, it takes a lot of courage. I
Yeah,
am not going. I mean,
it does.
if I mean, it's yes, and there are people in my life that say, that often contact me and say, "I don't know how you're doing what you're doing or why you continue doing it."
Hmm.
And, why not just make a difference in, just with the people that you care about the most and those that are closest to you. And I mean, I am making a difference to the people that are closest to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that I'm just trying. And by the way, I'm not trying to be a martyr and like, oh, I've got to change the world, otherwise I don't mean anything. No, it's there's just a real burning desire that I have, and I've had it for, I think, even before I met my mentor and
Mm,
mentors, since I was very small,
yeah.
a small child, uh, to unite people. And I think that that might be because I saw a lot of violence when I was growing up,
Mm,
in interpersonal relationships. And I witnessed that as a young child and as a teenager and as a young adult too. And it frightened me, and I wasn't a fan of that. And I was always in my family and in my friendships, I experienced a lot of bullying, and I was always trying to figure out what exactly it was that had people be so angry
mm,
and so wanting to participate in conflict.
mm,
And so it was something that I know I felt as a younger person, that just I brought into my adult life. And then when I began working with my mentor in New York in 2009, it was something that I think just came so much to the forefront of who I like, the essence of who I am, that had started at a young age. But then I was like, oh, this is really the outlet where, whatever happened with me at a young age, or whatever I'd experienced, I was now taking that and being able to channel that into something that perhaps could contribute to having less conflict in the world. Like, one of the things that's very important to me is peace,
mm.
and that will always be important to me. Um, and so for me, uniting humanity really is peace. It's us coming together and looking at, why, first of all, why are we polarized? I mean, I believe that we're more alike than we are different.
Yeah.
And I mean, not everyone believes that. That's my personal opinion. Um, but I do think that the world, it could be, and I don't mean to be dramatic here either, but I my opinion, I think unless we really redefine what influencer means and look at what it means to be an influencer, that we are going down a very dangerous path. And I think that it's really a responsibility, a huge responsibility, gigantic, in fact, as an influencer, to wield that power in a way that is going to unite us rather than divide us. Because we can see throughout history too, with things that have been created, movements that have started, groups that have been formed, that they're not always formed or created, co-created in, I would call, universal values, which is what my mentor calls them.
Yeah.
Universal values are values that support not just yourself, myself, but all others as well. And so when we don't really look at what we're doing or saying or creating or co-creating in the world, and we're just going out there and just flapping our gums and being an influencer and not taking accountability or responsibility for that, it's those things can have a very powerful ripple effect, and they can be either a ripple effect for good or a ripple effect for more further polarization and division.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that it's a topic that is really important. Is what does it mean to be an influencer, and what is the responsibility? And also, then I think to support those people that are courageous enough to go against the grain because they have something in them. I personally believe that we, for whatever reason, are here on the planet, and we do have personal instructions inside of us that actually, and our life kind of lines up with those for whatever reason. And I feel like a lot of people, like you, have this burning um, desire, right? Because they're listening to the cultural conversation, a desire to actually make a difference, but they're, I don't, it feels like they don't have like a support structure around them, because it's important not only to have the desire, but you were lucky enough to come across a mentor, right? And that changed everything. And I think for a lot of people, they have those that burning, but where do they go? How do they start? What does that look like? you
Well,
know?
they can come to you and I.
That's true. They could absolutely come to you and I. I mean, that's why I started my PR company, with Michelle 25 years ago, was to get up underneath those people that were committed to making a difference, that were brave enough to get their voices out there. And I know you work with influencers exactly the same way, but it's important that you find that community around you to support you in, you know, fulfilling that, whatever that burning desire is that that you have, those personal instructions that you have.
I it's sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Please.
Oh, I wasn't sure if I was interrupting you there. I don't
No,
want to.
you weren't. It's perfect.
I that is really vital because you when we go out there and if we want to be an influencer or someone of influence, we start looking for the groups or you can even call them silos and echo chambers. Really, I mean
Hmm.
the groups that we have aligned values or opinions with. But see that therein lies an actual problem in itself.
Yeah.
So it's like that, and see that is a challenge that I see about being an influencer too, is that when you begin aligning yourself with groups or sort of identities and things like that, um, it's difficult to be an influencer that can listen to all,
Yeah.
because if what you're immersing yourself in every day is a group of people or groups, plural, with people who only have share your same opinions, then how are you going to be an influencer for all? And that's the thing too. Like that's another thing too. I mean, if you look at it from a business model perspective, I think choosing a niche is probably what most people do when they set out to influence, and it makes sense because if you're an influencer for all, if you're a voice for all, how do you monetize that?
Yeah.
How do you make a business out of not, so say you're a real estate agent. Okay, well, I'm going to go and be a real estate agent. I'm going to become an influencer in that area. That makes sense because that's your business.
Yeah.
When I'm talking about influencing is different than that. Um, like for me, when we redefine what influencer actually means, it will make us question everything we're currently looking at as influencers.
Mm.
Because influencers are steering us in a certain direction, just like media does, and
Yes.
they're steering our minds in a certain direction to believe in, to buy into some kind of opinion, product, idea, it's a service, etc. And so for me, it's about looking at, well, is that idea, product, service, is that going to serve all of humanity, or
Mm.
is that just going to serve some? And so I continually am listening for, and this is it's interesting. Just to give you an example of what I mean. I was on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and a friend of mine was posting some really polarizing messages, and that's okay. They can, but this is the thing: we're free to do whatever we want to do. It's not. It's neither bad or good or whatever. It's just what it is. And for me, it's not what I want to be an influencer for, because I don't want to divide people. I
Mm.
want to bring people together. I also want to have people get more present or re-presence themselves to the interconnectedness that we share. I
Yeah.
think that we've lost a lot of that in these identity politics and with the groups that we've joined and the silos and echo chambers and things like that. And I think, the reason why these things thrive so much is because we're all trying to find a sense of belonging. And so it
Mm.
makes sense. I want to belong. I
Right.
mean, when I was growing up, I was bullied, and so I wanted to figure out what it was that was first of all, how I could fit in, how I could belong, so I could change myself enough to belong. But how about just belonging just the way we are?
Mm, yeah,
Why do we have to change ourselves? Why can't we just belong because we're part of humanity and we all share that same common thread that we're all humans and we're all part of humanity? No matter how we show up, no matter how different we look, no matter how unique we are. I mean, I'm not saying that, we're all the same. That's not what I'm saying here. We're
yeah,
not. We're not all the same. First of all, I don't believe that. We're
yeah,
not.
right.
We're all, we are individuals, and we have beautiful uniqueness about each of ourselves. And I think that those uniquenesses are important to celebrate, very important to celebrate. I would just say that when we're doing that, is to not lose sight of the interconnectedness that we share. And I think that's a very interesting walk that we take when we're celebrating our uniquenesses while also recognizing that we are all very connected.
Yeah. I think that, one of the things that I see inside of the marketing world is we've been fed that something's wrong with you, it needs to be fixed.
Yes.
A guy named Edward Bernays, the godfather of PR, figured out that he could tap into people's psyches, aggravate that, and then ta-da, here is, there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with them, there's something wrong with it. And so we have this world of just basically not enough. And I, and what's interesting when you said that I hadn't seen it is just like people will go to those silos of the media or the influencers, that content they're consuming, but it's also very true with the marketing, right? And it's, the media that you pay attention to, they're trying to market you certain products that you're broken. If it goes hand in hand there. And I think that I love what you're saying, because I think unless we interrupt that and we get that we're enough and
Yes.
they're enough and it's enough, then basically we have these polarizing, because we're trying to fulfill a hole, trying to fulfill a need.
Yes.
And I think that that's it, on the marketing side of, when you decide, yeah, I want to be an influencer, it's so critical that your marketing aligns with your philosophies there, because it's so easy to fall into the traps, because that's what marketing does, create silos. What's their pain point? How do you aggravate it so that you can present your product to them? And that's the same with influencers. Like you say, like you were talking, those influencers that speak to a particular audience, they know the pain point and they try to leave it. But the problem is it just leads to polarization.
Yes.
And I think it's such a super interesting conversation and critical conversation, because if we don't interrupt that, then, we're heading down a particular road that just doesn't look very rosy.
No,
It looks quite frightening.
yes, 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 I
you know,
agree.
yeah,
Yeah,
particularly in the United States. I'm glad that I live in Europe, because when
yeah,
I fly back to the United States, I can feel the polarization. It's
yeah.
palpable now. When I'm around there, people are very angry, and really they're just not happy campers. And that's, I think, what the polarization has actually led to.
I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely would say, and I've lived in different countries, and I've lived in developing countries, and I, for personally, on my own personal opinion, is that I definitely feel the polarization more here than
Yeah.
any and than in any other country I've ever lived in. And I've spoken about that to my parents too. And when I first moved to the United States from Canada, there were some things I experienced here that I had not witnessed in when
Mm.
I was younger,
Yeah.
uh, not to the extent that I witnessed down here.
Yeah.
And even though Canada is obviously very similar to the United States, there was definitely a difference in things that I saw in some of the states I went and lived in here. And it was a wake up call for me. Definitely, I think that I lived in quite a bit of ignorance for a long time, and it was also very sad. It made me very sad, and I think that part of that sadness came from the fact that I do resonate quite deeply with um, with just the human experience,
Mm,
um, perhaps due to my own personal experiences, but also due to just resonating with people in general, and feeling, experiencing, at least at some level, pain when I listen to people's stories.
yeah,
Um,
it's heartbreaking. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, and I think that I really do feel that influencers and media professionals, yourself, myself, I'm a filmmaker, you're a publicist,
Yeah.
I think that really I do, and I mean, maybe you don't feel this way, but I feel like it's part of our job, our duty, as people who wield some kind of influence, to really use that in a responsible way and
Yes.
to be accountable. Because when you're given those types of platforms, when we're given these types of platforms and these types of businesses, and people are listening to us, that if we're doing anything other than uniting, then that can be a frightening and slippery slope to go down. And when I look at the movements that are being created too, you're always seeing movements that are happening, and then you're seeing other movements pop up as a result of that movement to
Yes.
kind of counteract those things.
Yes.
And that's when I'm also recognizing that, well, what are these movements being created? Like, what universal values, once again, are these movements being created? Are they being created to unite people, or are they being created to make a statement? But then are they dividing people further? And so I'm always also looking at movements that have been created in the past, are being created in the future, looking at things and how they're supporting those particular groups.
Yes. And
Yes.
I really admire you and your courage to be out there and fulfill on that burning desire that you have. So, question:
Yeah.
if someone else has a burning desire and they would like to connect with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Uh,
Because
that's
you're everywhere. Do you have a preferred way? You're everywhere. Do you have a preferred way to connect?
I know, yeah, I know. That's a good question. Thank you.
Because I mean, there's a bazillion choices I know. Like I could list, I could list like da, 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 like they do a podcast, or you go here, and for your free offer, you could go here. But we're not doing that kind of podcast. So where would you like people, and how would you like people to connect with you?
So, so probably through my website, I would
Okay.
say. Yeah, it's because that's my email address. That's probably the best way.
And
And
it
also through you.
and it
I'm joking.
is
I'm
www
joking
dot.
about it.
What's your website?
Oh, acmediaglobal.com.
Perfect. Okay, and we will make sure that it's
Yeah.
easily clickable for people, and that
Yeah.
they do that.
I
Well,
link LinkedIn
yeah,
is always a great place too. I mean, it's
yeah,
always it's a great place to. I just wanted to say one more thing, Drew. Is that okay?
yeah, of course.
Thank you. This film that's in post production right now
Mm,
was a very big learning experience for me, and it was when I set out on the journey to do it. I set out, and I remember writing to my mentor and letting her know this, and I said, I want to unite people with this film,
mm.
even though this film would be considered
Well, give people a little synopsis of the film. Like, yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's called Living Undone,
Mm,
and it's about how a mother struggles to free her son from prison, and then also has to manage supporting him with massive mental health issues after he leaves prison, PTSD being one of them, as
mm,
well as substance misuse.
mm,
And so when I started out in this film, I recognized that doing this type of content would be speaking mostly to one political party,
mhm,
when I'm addressing the systems of digital punishment, mass incarceration, mental health, the system or lack thereof, and also big pharma, drug misuse, addiction, things like that. And so I really wanted to unite or cross political divides. If you can't unite if you can't unite, I'm looking at crossing those divides,
Yeah.
and then speaking, and mostly actually more listening to be each side, and providing a space where each side can also listen to each other.
Mm.
So, and find some common ground. And that was one thing I noticed about filming this film, which took us quite a long time. I mean, I began the journey in December 2021, and we're just now in post production.
Wow.
Um, but one thing that we did accomplish was we worked with both Democrats and Republicans on this film.
Mm.
Are both committed to criminal justice reform,
Mm.
and are both in the space of looking at the mental health care system in the United States, what's working, what's not working, as well as the drug misuse and addiction and big pharma systems in this space too, and what's working and what's not working. And I was really pleasantly surprised to see that when we were creating this space on set, that my crew and also the subjects I was working with were coming from all different political backgrounds.
Mm.
And it was so beautiful because I was like, my God, this is a very small example of really what can happen in the world if we just listen and when we find a common purpose to work on.
Yeah.
And one of the common values that we found while working on this film was that we all want our streets to be safe for our kids.
Mm.
And it didn't matter if you were a liberal or conservative or a Republican or a Democrat or middle of the road or libertarian or independent. It didn't matter. It's that everybody wanted streets to be safe for their loved ones, their children, their families, their communities. And in order for that to happen, what would we need to change to have that come to fruition?
Mm.
And so those systems I just spoke about, those three systems do need to have transformative experiences take place inside those systems
Yep.
to actually achieve safe streets.
Mm.
That's where we're all able to come together.
I love that. The
So
underneath the big conversations to the why of it, why bringing it together. It's beautiful. Great.
yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see it.
Thank you. I hope you'll come whenever we do the screening. Please come.
Yes. Can you do a screening in Europe?
Well, if we get into film festivals, can you come as my date?
I done, done, and done. Sorted.
Okay.
On that
Okay.
note, we're leaving. Thank you, Amanda, for taking this time to chat with me. I adore you, and I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Drew. Thank you. I'm really, really honored to be here. Thank you. Thank you.